You know that moment when your whole world just shifts? Like when you're looking at a puzzle and suddenly all the pieces click into place, except the picture isn't what you thought it was gonna be? Yeah, that's where this story starts. I'm Jenna Mitchell, and for 8 years, I've been waking up at 4:30 a.m. to be the voice of Millbrook, Ohio. Rise and shine with Jenna on WMLB 103.5. That's me, your friendly neighborhood radio host who knows everyone's kids' names, remembers your anniversary, and probably cried with you when your dog died. But here's the thing about being everyone's favorite morning voice. Sometimes you forget to listen to your own life. My husband, Scott, runs an auto shop downtown. Good guy, or so I thought. Salt of the earth, you know? The kind of man who still opens doors and calls older ladies ma'am. We've been married 15 years, and I thought I knew him better than I know my own radio show playlist. Turns out I was dead wrong. It started with little things. New cologne. Not the cheap stuff he usually bought at Walmart, but something fancy. Designer shit. He said a customer gave it to him as a tip. Yeah, right. Then there were the late nights at the shop. More and more of them. And when he came home, he didn't smell like motor oil anymore. He smelled like, well, like someone else. But you know what really got me? The phone calls. Scott's never been much of a phone talker, but suddenly he's stepping outside every time his cell rings. Just work stuff, babe, he'd say. Boring car talk. I'm not stupid. I might sound all sweet and innocent on the radio, but I didn't get this job by being naive. So I started paying attention. Real attention. The first red flag should have been when our joint credit card started showing charges I didn't recognize. Jewelry from stores I'd never been to. Dinners at restaurants Scott had always claimed were too fancy for us. When I asked about it, he had an answer for everything. Client gifts, business dinners with suppliers. But then I found the receipts, hidden in his toolbox like some kind of amateur spy. 2 dinners for 2 at Giuseppe's, the romantic Italian place with the candles and violin music. Scott hates Italian food, always said it was pretentious garbage. Yet there he was, dropping $200 on pasta and wine, twice in a week. That's when the sick feeling in my stomach turned into something colder, something calculating. 3 weeks ago, I was driving home from a late dinner with my sister when I saw his truck parked behind City Hall at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Now, I know for a fact the city offices close at 5, and there's no reason for Scott to be there unless he was meeting someone who worked there. I parked across the street and waited. 20 minutes later, out comes my husband with Rebecca Walsh, the mayor's wife. And they weren't discussing municipal policies, if you catch my drift. They were all over each other like teenagers at prom. Rebecca fucking Walsh, Miss Perfect, with her perfect blonde hair and her perfect little Honda Civic with that stupid coexist bumper sticker. The same woman who runs the bake sale at church and talks about family values at every town meeting. The same woman who'd smiled at me just last Sunday and complimented my dress. I sat in my car watching my marriage explode, and you know what my first thought was? Well, this is gonna make great radio. See, that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart, it rewires your brain. Suddenly you're thinking like a chess player instead of a wife. I drove home that night, and Scott was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I stood in the doorway looking at him, and I felt nothing. No anger yet, no sadness. Just this cold, calculating calm, like I was looking at a stranger who'd been living in my house, eating my food, sleeping in my bed, lying to my face every single day. The next morning, I was back on the air like nothing had happened. Good morning, Millbrook. You're listening to Rise and Shine with Jenna. And boy, do I have some interesting stories to share with you today. That's when I came up with my plan. See, I've got something Scott and Rebecca don't have. A platform, a voice that reaches 3 counties, an audience that trusts me completely. They'd taken my marriage, my trust, my future, but they'd forgotten about my superpower. So I decided to use it. I'm starting a new segment today called Letters from the Heart, I announced that Tuesday morning. Real stories from real people in our community. All anonymous, of course, but I think you'll find them educational. Then I read the first letter, written by me, of course, but based on absolutely true events. This letter comes from someone who signs herself Betrayed in Millbrook, I said, putting on my most sympathetic voice. She writes, Dear Jenna, I've been married for 15 years, and I thought I knew my husband. But lately, I've been noticing things. New cologne, secret phone calls, nights when he comes home smelling like expensive perfume instead of honest work. Last week, I discovered he's been meeting someone at the old Miller Farm Road, the dead end by the creek, every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 p.m. I followed him there once and watched from the trees. My husband and another woman, someone I see at the grocery store, someone whose husband waves to me at church. They're using our family car, our family money for their secret little rendezvous. I don't know what hurts more, the cheating or the lies or the fact that they think I'm too stupid to figure it out. The phone lines went absolutely nuts. I'm talking Christmas morning, lottery jackpot, zombie apocalypse levels of crazy. Everyone wanted to talk. Everyone had a story. Everyone had been through something similar. But more importantly, everyone was listening. The first caller was Margaret from Elm Street. Her voice was shaky, emotional. Jenna, honey, this story, it hit me right in the gut. I went through something similar 10 years ago, found out my ex-husband was cheating with my best friend. The lies, the gaslighting, making me feel crazy for suspecting what my gut already knew. That woman needs to know she's not alone. Then came Dolores from the west side. I'm telling you, Jenna, there's something in the water in this town. Too many good women being played for fools by men who think they're clever. We need to stick together. And then there was Sarah, whose husband had left her for his secretary 2 years ago. Betrayed in Millbrook, if you're listening, honey, you are not crazy. Trust your instincts. Document everything. And when you're ready to leave, make sure you take him for everything he's worth. I felt this wave of solidarity, a feminine rage and support flowing through the airwaves. These women understood. They'd been where I was sitting. They knew the special kind of hell that comes with loving someone who treats you like you're disposable. Wednesday brought letter number 2. I laid it on a little thicker. Today's letter is from Devastated in Ohio, I announced. She says the other woman drives a silver Honda Civic with a coexist bumper sticker. Ironic, right? She preaches tolerance while tearing apart families. She works at City Hall, and she's married with teenage kids. Wonder if her husband knows that while he's coaching Little League, she's screwing around behind the Dairy Queen on Route 9.
Devastated also mentions that her husband has been using their joint credit card for these affairs. $200 dinners at Giuseppe's, jewelry from Tiffany's, gifts that she'll never see. Money that should have gone toward their daughter's college fund or fixing the roof that's been leaking for 6 months. The calls came flooding in again. This time, women were sharing stories about financial infidelity, money stolen from family accounts, secret credit cards, college funds raiding for affair expenses. Linda from Pine Street called in crying. My ex did the same thing, took our vacation money, 5 years of saving for a trip to Europe, and spent it on his girlfriend. They went to Cabo while I was home thinking we were broke. I found the photos on his phone. Her in a bikini, him buying her drinks, both of them laughing like they'd pulled off the perfect crime. Then, Mike, my producer, slipped me a note during the commercial break. Jenna, we're getting calls from 3 counties. People are driving to work late just to listen. Advertisers are calling asking about next week's spots. This is huge. But the most powerful call came from a teenager. Couldn't have been more than 16. Miss Jenna, this is Ashley. I'm calling because I think my dad is cheating on my mom. And listening to these stories, I realize she probably knows, but she's too scared to do anything about it. My parents have been together since high school, and my mom, she's never worked outside the house. She doesn't even have her own credit card. I think she stays because she doesn't know how to leave. My heart broke for this kid. Ashley, honey, that's a really tough situation. But you know what? There are resources. There are people who can help your mom if and when she's ready. I just want her to know that it's not her fault, that she deserves better, that we all deserve better. By Thursday, the whole town was buzzing. People were connecting dots, whispering in grocery store aisles, gossiping at the gas station. I was conducting a symphony of small-town drama, and every note was perfectly pitched to destroy the two people who destroyed me. But something else was happening too. Women were talking to each other in ways they hadn't before. Really talking. About marriage. About red flags. About what they'd been willing to tolerate because they thought that's what love looked like. Thursday's letter was the kill shot. "This one's from Awakened in Millbrook," I said, and I could practically hear the entire town holding its breath. She writes, "I know exactly who my husband is cheating with now. I have photographs. Tuesday night, I followed them to the Millbrook Motel, you know, the hourly rate place by the interstate. They checked into room 12 at 9:15 p.m. The woman was wearing a red dress and black heels. While they were inside, I called the police about a possible break-in at City Hall because I'd noticed this woman's car there all day, but at 10 p.m., the building was dark and her car was gone. She'd left work early, again. Police ran the plates on the Honda Civic at the motel, registered to Rebecca Walsh, 412 Maple Street. The same Rebecca Walsh who talks about family values at town meetings and organizes the church bake sale. The same Rebecca Walsh who's married to Tom Walsh, that sweet man who coaches Little League and volunteers at the food bank. I wonder how he'd feel knowing his wife is using taxpayer time to have an affair with a married auto mechanic." Dead fucking silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the phones stopped ringing for a moment. It was like the whole town to the collective breath. Then I let it hang there for a beat and continued. "Rebecca Walsh, folks. The same Rebecca Walsh who's paid by your tax dollars to work full days at City Hall, but apparently has lots of free time for extracurricular activities." My phone was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. I ignored them all and kept going. Awakened goes on to say, "I've been documenting everything. The credit card charges, the late nights, the lies. I've taken photos of them together. I've recorded phone conversations where she calls during work hours. I have evidence of her leaving City Hall early at least 12 times in the past month, all on days when my husband claimed to be working late. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow and reporting Miss Walsh for misuse of taxpayer time and resources. I'm also donating every penny of my settlement to the Millbrook Women's Shelter because I've learned that betrayal isn't just personal. It's a community issue. When public officials abuse their positions, when trusted members of our community live double lives, it affects all of us." The silence stretched for another beat, then the phones exploded. Lines 1 through 6 lit up simultaneously. People were calling from their cars, their offices, their kitchens. The whole town was either outraged or fascinated or both. But then something beautiful happened. Tom Walsh called in. "Jenna." His voice was quiet, broken. "This is Tom Walsh, Rebecca's husband." "Oh, Tom, honey, No, it's okay. I needed to hear this. I've suspected for months, but I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Rebecca had explanations. Always made me feel like I was being paranoid or controlling for asking questions.
Tom, I'm so sorry. You know what the worst part is? I believed her when she said she was working late for the good of the community. I was proud of her dedication. I'd tell people at the hardware store how lucky our town was to have someone so committed to public service. Committed, all right? Just not to what I thought. Tom, you don't have to. No, I want to say this. I want to thank Awakened in Millbrook, whoever she is. She did what I couldn't do. She told the truth. And now I can stop wondering if I'm crazy and start figuring out how to rebuild my life. When Tom hung up, there wasn't a dry eye in the station. Mike had tears streaming down his face. Even Mrs. Patterson, who'd been pacing behind the glass partition, looking increasingly nervous, had stopped to wipe her eyes. The rest of Thursday's show turned into something I'd never experienced before. It became a community therapy session. People calling in to share their stories, their pain, their strength. Wives who'd left abusive marriages. Husbands who'd been cheated on. Adult children dealing with their parents' divorces. Mary from Oak Street called to say she'd finally found the courage to leave her emotionally abusive husband after hearing these stories. She said, "I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one. And if these other women could be brave, so could I." Dr. Peterson, the town therapist, called in to offer free counseling sessions for anyone dealing with infidelity or divorce. She said, "Sometimes the hardest part is taking that first step, knowing that other people understand what you're going through." By the time I wrapped up the show, there were protesters outside the station. About 15 people with signs defending Rebecca and Scott. Signs that read, "Keep personal business private," and "Radio should unite, not divide." I recognize most of them. Rebecca's book club friends, Scott's drinking buddies, a few City Hall employees who were probably worried about their own secrets being exposed.
But there were way more supporters, maybe 50 people cheering me on, holding signs that said, "Truth matters," and "Hometown Queen tells it like it is." Mrs. Henderson was there with a homemade sign reading, "Transparency in Government." Father Murphy stood with several parishioners holding "Honesty is a Family Value" posters. Scott was waiting in the parking lot when I came out. His face was red as a tomato and not from the sun. He'd clearly been drinking, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled like whiskey. "Jenna, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Oh, hey, honey," I said, sweet as pie. "Just sharing some community stories. Bringing people together through the power of radio." "You're destroying my business. People are canceling appointments." "Your business built on trust and reputation." I laughed, and it felt good, really good. Funny how that works when people find out you can't trust the guy fixing their cars not to screw around on his wife. "You can't do this. This is personal." "Personal?" I stepped closer, and he actually backed up. "Scott, honey, the moment you decided to fuck the mayor's wife, you made it public. I'm just sharing the news." "Jenna, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling." "Counseling?" I almost laughed. "Scott, you've been lying to my face for months. You've been stealing our money to romance another woman. You've been treating me like I'm stupid, like I don't deserve basic respect or honesty. What exactly do you think counseling is going to fix?" I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. This was a choice, a series of choices. Every time you texted her, every time you met her, every time you lied to me about working late, those were all choices. He looked around at the crowd, some of whom were watching our conversation with obvious interest. "Can we at least do this in private?" "Private?" I gestured to the protesters and supporters. "Scott, this stopped being private the moment you made it a public scandal. Look around. Half the town is here because your choices affected more than just us. You involved a public official. You made it everyone's business." Friday's show was my masterpiece. I called it Moving Forward, a community conversation. I had the police chief on to talk about investigating Rebecca's misuse of city resources.
Chief Morrison had always been a straight shooter, and he didn't mince words. Folks, when we receive credible allegations about misuse of taxpayer time and resources, we have to investigate. That's our duty to the community. Based on the information that's come to light this week, we'll be looking into Miss Walsh's work schedule, her use of city property, and whether any laws have been broken. The City Council President, Maria Santos, discussed new ethics policies and accountability measures. This situation has highlighted some gaps in our oversight procedures. We're implementing new policies requiring documentation of all after-hours building access and regular ethics training for all city employees. But the most powerful guest was Jennifer Adams, director of the Millbrook Women's Shelter. Jenna, what we've seen this week is something beautiful and important. Women supporting women, people standing up for what's right. We've had 12 new volunteers sign up since Tuesday, and donations have increased by 300%. But more than that, we've had women calling our hotline to ask for help. Women who've been too scared or ashamed to reach out before. Sometimes it takes hearing someone else's story to realize you're not alone. And then I read my final letter. "This one's from the hometown queen," I announced. She writes, "Dear listeners, this week taught me something important about power. For 8 years, I've been your voice, your connection, your friend in the morning. I never understood the responsibility that came with that until I needed to use it. My husband cheated on me with a married city employee. They used public property and our family money for their affair. I could have handled this privately, but I realized something. Their betrayal affects all of us. When public officials abuse their positions, it damages our entire community. When trusted members of our town live double lives, it makes us all question who we can believe, what institutions we can trust." I paused, looking through the glass at the crowd outside, which had grown even larger. So, I used my voice to tell the truth. Not just for revenge, though I won't lie, that felt pretty damn good, but for accountability, for transparency, for every woman who's wondered if she's crazy for suspecting her husband, for every taxpayer who deserves honest public service, for every person who believes that actions should have consequences. The phones were ringing nonstop, but I wasn't taking calls. This was my moment. Today, I'm announcing several things. First, I am filing for divorce from Scott Mitchell. Our marriage is over, and it was over the moment he chose to betray our vows and our trust. Second, I'm donating this week's ad revenue, $23,000, to the Millbrook Women's Shelter and establishing a new fund for women leaving abusive or unfaithful relationships. Third, I'm announcing the creation of the Truth and Trust Foundation, which will provide free counseling and legal services for families dealing with infidelity and betrayal. The crowd outside erupted, car horns honking, people cheering. Inside the station, my boss looked like she didn't know whether to fire me or give me a raise. Finally, I continued, to those who criticized me this week, you're right. I could have suffered in silence, could have protected reputations, kept the peace. But sometimes love looks like protection, and sometimes love looks like accountability. My love for this community, my respect for marriage and family values, my commitment to truth, all of that required me to speak up. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. And to Scott and Rebecca, if you're listening, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I forgive you, and I'm moving on. I hope you can learn from this experience and become better people. But that's your journey now, not mine. When I walked outside after the show, the applause was deafening. Rebecca Walsh drove by slowly, sunglasses hiding her face, a U-Haul trailer behind her Honda. Tom Walsh stood with the supporters, tears streaming down his face as people hugged him and offered words of comfort. Scott was nowhere to be seen. The local news picked up the story that weekend. Radio host exposes affair on air made the front page of the Millbrook Gazette. By Monday, I was getting calls from radio stations in Columbus, Cleveland, even Chicago. 2 weeks later, Rebecca Walsh resigned from her position at City Hall. The investigation had found evidence of chronic misuse of public time and resources.
Her marriage to Tom was over, and she'd moved out of town to stay with her sister in another state. Scott's auto shop closed a month later. Turns out, when people stop trusting you to be honest about small things like oil changes, they sure as hell don't trust you with big things like transmission repairs. He sold the building at a loss and moved to Florida, where apparently nobody listens to Ohio radio. 3 months later, I'm hosting a syndicated show called Truth and Trust with Jenna, reaching 4 states. The format is simple. People share their stories of betrayal, healing, and moving forward. We provide resources, support, and, most importantly, the reminder that nobody has to suffer in silence. Tom Walsh became a regular volunteer at the women's shelter. Helping other people, he told me once, helps me heal too. Ashley, the teenager who'd called in about her father, eventually helped her mother leave an emotionally abusive marriage. They moved in with Ashley's grandmother and started over together. And me? I learned something important about my voice, my power, and my responsibility to use both. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to protect people from their own consequences. I learned that secrets have power only as long as they stay secret. Most importantly, I learned that I was never the victim in this story. I was always the protagonist. I just needed to start acting like it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just tell the goddamn truth. You know what they say, don't mess with a woman who buys ink by the barrel. Well, in my case, it's airtime by the hour. And honey, I had plenty to spare. The funny thing is, Scott thought he was so clever. He thought he could play me for a fool, that I'd never figure it out, that even if I did, I'd be too embarrassed or too weak to do anything about it. But he forgot something important. I didn't just have a voice. I had the voice. The voice this town trusted. The voice they turned to every morning. The voice they believed in. And when you try to silence a woman who makes her living being heard, well, that's when you learn just how loud she can really be.